Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year, and welcome to
Welcome,
the first PDN Live for 2016. I'm your moderator,
moderator
Shannon,
Shannon,
and with
and
me
with
is
me
Rob.
is
And tonight's
Rob.
episode is
And
Ask
tonight's
Rob
episode is
Anything
Ask
About
Rob
Personal Defense.
Anything About Personal Defense.
Hello, Rob.
Hello, Rob.
Hey, I'm here. Apparently, I have echo, which I'm trying to figure out right now. So, is that bad echo still? Nod if
No,
yes.
I don't
Great.
hear echo.
All right. So, Happy New Year. Last year, we kicked off PDN Live. It was the kind of something we decided to try to do to see if it was going to have an audience. And the PDN subscribers and our premium members and everybody in social media world out there has said that they like it, and they keep sending questions. So we decided to do it again. And tonight is just like we started, self-defense free-for-all. We just said, hey, send us some questions you want answered, and that was fun. And over the last year, we've had a special guest. A lot of our PDN contributors have been on. William April, Cecil Birch, Grant Cunningham, Derek Poole, who works as a subject matter expert and helps to answer a lot of the questions in a lot of our articles and video comments just in general at personaldefensenetwork.com. A lot of those guys were on during the year. Craig Douglas was on. But I think Mike Seeklander, I'm trying to remember to not to miss anybody, but there's no way I'll get them all. So we had probably 8 or 10 guests. Alessandro Padavane was on. And now we're starting over the year again with just me. And we've got a ton of questions, I know. As usual, I haven't seen them, but everyone's told me there's some great ones. So we'll get started probably pretty quick, Shannon.
Yeah, so for everyone who's just joining, don't forget to follow us online and connect with us on social. You can find us online at personaldefensenetwork.com, on Instagram at PD Network, on Twitter we're at P_D_N, and then of course on Facebook, Personal Defense Network. If you haven't already, sign up for our free newsletter. It's below. There should be a link there. Great content there, so you can review all this after the show. So, Rob, where can we find you online?
Pretty much everywhere. All of the Facebook social media pages, there's 2 of those on there, plus the Personal Defense Network page that we run. IC Training Company has the website at ictraining.us. Of course, we've got Twitter and Instagram out there. Pincus Rob is my tag there. And as most people know that follow everything closely, all of those go directly to me. So the Personal Defense Network one goes directly to PDN staff, and if it's aimed at me, I'll end up getting it. But all of my stuff on social media is actually my stuff. So I manage that on a pretty much daily basis. And of course, we get a lot of questions there, and that really is what's behind what we're doing tonight. Is I spend all day, answering different questions. People will post publicly. Sometimes I'll send them privately. And I always encourage when they send me an email or they send a private message, 9 times out of 10, it's something that someone else would probably benefit from greatly. And that's why this format's great. So I really appreciate everybody who did contribute questions this week, this month, and I would encourage everybody, every time we have an expert, every time we have a contributor on, jump in there, send a question, because, even if you're the only one that benefits, well, that's kind of the point, but chances are there's going to be a whole bunch of other people that can benefit greatly from this information. And remember, those of you watching and tuning in live, that's awesome, but these things live forever. We put them up at personaldefensenetwork.com. People can watch them and tune into them at any time. The descriptions are searchable. Sometimes I'll write a blog article at PDN about what we talked about. So there's a lot of information that has a long lifespan, but the questions are what drive it all. So keep sending it.
Awesome. And if people want to train with you in person, what's your schedule looking like for the first part of this year?
Well, as has been the trend for the last couple of years, I'm pushing more and more of my courses into that March to July timeframe on a percentage basis. So this year I'll run 30-something courses during that time frame. Of course, that's the Personal Defense Network Training Tour. This year we'll have about 70 courses, and it looks like we're going to have about a dozen contributing instructors. Of course, as usual, we'll announce our sponsors and our contributing instructors over the next 60 days, and then we'll launch in mid-March this year down in Florida as usual, and I'll drive up the East Coast and through the Midwest, across the plains, over the mountains, and finish up out in your neck of the woods in the Pacific Northwest in July.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to having you there. And so we just jump right into the question?
Let's do it.
All right. So where can I get defense training on multiple gun platforms in a group situation?
I'm wondering if, I don't know, there's 3 or 4 different ways to read that question. So I'm gonna take a stab at what the intention was. If the idea is, how do I train on maybe pistol and rifle use in a group setting as opposed to private training, I'm going to go for that. And we offer at IC Training, we obviously offer a lot of courses that are pistol only. We also offer a smaller percentage of our courses are rifle only, but quite often we do them back to back, and we'll have a lot of the same people take those courses together. So, for example, we're doing one in Florida to kick the tour off. We're doing a week down there that will involve some days that are pistol only, some days that are rifle only. Generally speaking, we don't do a lot of transitional training in the personal defense sector for you have a rifle or a shotgun and then you transition to a pistol. Honestly, I just don't think there's a lot of call for that kind of thing. Obviously, a SWAT guy, a military guy, law enforcement officer who has a patrol rifle or a shotgun in their car, they're going to grab that long gun, and they've still got the dedicated duty pistol that they're carrying around all the time as well to transition to, and there's a much higher likelihood they're going to need that kind of a skill set. In terms of the civilian, sure, you could have a carry gun on inside your house and grab a defensive rifle. Inside of that setting, again, the kind of the compounding series of events that comes to the point where your long gun fails and you go to your pistol and you happen to have both a long gun and a pistol, much less likely in the private sector. So we cover that in our 2-day rifle class, our 2-day combat-focused carbine class. Someone can get into transitioning from the long gun to the pistol. Sometimes we'll get to it in our 1-day class, but usually not. And I would say that that's probably true for the majority of the firearms instructors inside of the personal defense network realm. So if you look at any of the firearms instructors inside of our group, I don't see very many of them doing the, wear your plate carrier, wear your camouflage, come out for your, what I would consider more fantasy camp training, bounding Overwatch and room clearing and that kind of thing. Focusing on personal defense, there isn't a lot of room for, switching between multiple platforms in one event. But getting the training, going back to back, that makes a lot of sense.
Gotcha. So what's the best way to conceal a larger gun?
Best way to conceal a larger gun is probably twofold. I would say two things. One, obviously layered clothing is going to kind of cover up the printing of the gun a lot more than just one layer of clothing. So if like right now I'm wearing a polo shirt and a t-shirt, that would be more likely to conceal any given gun than just the polo shirt or just the t-shirt. So layered clothing is one thing. You almost certainly want to be inside the waistband, and I would just remind people to sort of consider what the plausible circumstances are. What are the most likely events? What are the reasonable events to get ready for? Not what is possible. Not to go to the extreme of the worst case scenario and try to be prepared for that. Because guess what? You could tell me that's what I'm prepared for, and then immediately ask me a follow-up question. Well, what if your third gun you're carrying breaks? You can chase that kind of stuff to an extreme that becomes ridiculous. So, I don't really subscribe to that whole idea that, if you're going to carry one gun, you should carry two, and if you're going to carry two guns, you should carry 5 magazines. You're going to carry 5 magazines, they should all be double stacked. I just don't think that's practical. So a larger gun may not even be what you need. If you find yourself with a gun that you believe is the right gun for you to carry and you're having trouble concealing it, an inside the waistband holster, if you're not already doing that, is obviously going to make that much easier. Having a good quality holster that holds the gun close to the body yet comfortably, and then considering layered clothing instead of just trying to go with one concealment garment.
If you could be proficient at one thing related to concealed carry, what would it be?
Let me get really technical on if I'm going to be very technical about it and say one thing specifically related to concealed carry, it's going to be presentation from the holster. I think that's what's missing from a lot of people's repertoire is the idea of being able to get to your gun quickly and then present it efficiently and consistently to a good shooting position. That's the biggest thing I see missing from gun people's repertoire. In other words, there's a lot of people out there who tell me they shoot well and they go practice their shooting and maybe they do a lot of competitions, but really practicing a realistic presentation in the context of defensive shooting immediately to that shot, that's going to be what I think people really probably have, that's what they're missing. That's assuming, of course, that we're talking about, we've already covered the fundamentals of defensive shooting. The thing that's specific to concealed carry that most people miss is realistic and efficient presentation from the holster.
So I'm wondering what you would recommend for readiness preparation for one's home security firearm in a house with children. So thinking biometric safe on a bedside, handgun loaded and ready.
Um, yeah, quick access safes are the go-to. People know that Gun Vault's been a sponsor of the Personal Defense Network training tour since we started it. They've been, a supporter of PDN since we started it, and I've been using them for a lot longer than that. The Gun Vault series of quick access safes is my primary method of staging defensive handguns, especially. But with the TAC Vault, you can also stage a defensive long gun as well. The nice thing about the small pistol safes is that you do have the option of the very ergonomic push button kind of sequence or the biometric. Years and years and years ago, I was very skeptical of the biometrics, but they've come a long way, and I actually rely on the biometrics today as well. So quick access safes is my personal go-to. The other options you have are things that are more clandestine in nature, things that are more hiding the gun than really securing the gun. Those are good options as well. Of course, you could hide the gun vault, and then you get the best of both worlds. You're hiding a gun and you're securing a gun from somebody that stumbles upon it but doesn't know how to get into the safe. And that's really what we're worried about a lot with the kids. So if you have a way of securing a gun that's still accessible to you, right? What we want to avoid is storage with our defensive firearms. Storage is, the gun's disassembled, or the gun's over here and the ammo's over there. The gun's behind a padlock that you've got to, 3 to the left, 2 to the right kind of a thing. You don't want to be doing that in a high-stress situation. So quick access safes are the key. Education inside the household, obviously, is always going to go a long way, making sure that the kids, in an age-appropriate way, that the kids, know about the guns, know what to do with the guns, what not to do with the guns, and don't have that kind of, well, we have guns in the house, but we're not going to tell the kids about it. And you've got a typical 13-year-old, and you're letting them play with the airsoft, or you're letting them play the video games, but at the same time, you're trying to hide the gun from them. Think about it. When you were 10, 12, 13, they're probably going to find the gun. And it's probably better that they're educated about it, just like you educate them about scissors in the house, or prescription drugs in the house, or the alcohol that's in the house. And you set rules and parameters and education around those things, so that the security, the actual lock, isn't what's keeping those kids safe. It's their brain and your efforts as a responsible gun-owning parent.
So do you think PDN will ever start teaching reloading classes? Seems like a great thing to learn in person instead of through books and the internet.
That's really not under Personal Defense Network's umbrella, let's say. We've been really specific at PDN about sticking to what we really are passionate about. For me personally, recruiting contributors that are also passionate about personal defense and self-defense, and reloading, with the exception of you could say, well, I reload so that I can train more, so that I can practice more, and come to more classes, maybe attend more classes. That's really the only way we could justify that. We, of course, for a while, we were working very closely with Gander Mountain Academy, and Gander Mountain Academy really was much more broad. They weren't just interested in personal defense. Gander Mountain Academy was also interested in teaching people about, hunter safety and things like that, and certainly would have been a great topic to cover with that side of the cadre. But as far as a pure PDN pace, I don't really think reloading is going to be there. I'll tell you, we have obviously hundreds and hundreds of students every year, and in 2015, I don't know that there were 10 that had reloaded ammunition that they were practicing or training with. So I don't know how big it is in our audience. It's certainly something that, especially with other partners, people that we've worked with in the past, again, Gander Mountain, I would recommend people go check out Brownells. Is a great place, resource for reloading information as well. So there are resources out there. PDN probably isn't one of them for that side of the firearms world.
Very good. It is advocated to use a powerful flashlight to blind your adversary while you shoot him. Why can't you just blind him by shining your laser in his eyes?
Some people do advocate using a light as a defensive tool. I don't, unless it's an improvised tool or it's an alternative tool. You can use a light for distraction, certainly. There are strobing lights that are meant to disorient and help people, cause someone to go off balance, potentially. There are those uses of handheld lights or weapon-mounted lights. I don't advise that one plans on using a light attached to a weapon as a primary light in the first place. For personal defense, for home defense, I'd rather see someone with a handheld flashlight and then have a weapon-mounted light as a secondary or alternative light. Remember, a light's primary purpose is to find and identify threats and or in the home defense situation to find and identify family members, to make sure that the person coming around the corner isn't a threat, or more importantly, if you have a gun in your other hand, making sure it is a threat before you point that gun at them. So I'm not a big fan of the idea that we're going to be running around our house using a gun with a flashlight on it to search for bad guys. We wouldn't want to search for bad guys 9 times out of 10 anyway. If we're searching for anybody, if we're moving through our house for any reason, it's to secure our family members and make sure they're safe, and get them behind us and with us, barricaded somewhere, get the police on the way. And then if the bad guy comes to us, we use that light to positively identify them. As far as blinding someone with a light, I think that's a bit extreme. Disorienting them, distracting them, sure. Stunning them. A lot of times when I'm walking around in urban environments where I can't have a gun, can't have maybe even a knife, some places around the world that I travel, I might palm a small handheld flashlight. We talked about this with Chris Fry with our improvised weapons Q&A. And then certainly that could be brought up and flashed into someone's eyes to disorient them if they were approaching me. But I'm not doing that to blind them as if, well, I've won now. It's a disorienting or distracting action. Then I have to follow up with something else. All that said, because we're not trying to blind somebody with a light, obviously we're also not going to try to blind someone with a laser. Keep in mind also that laser is going to be much smaller. It's a little pinpoint at the normal personal defense or home defense distances. So if we did want to distract someone with light, a good quality bright white light would be a much better option than a pinpoint laser light. I have a home defense gun here with a laser and light module mounted on it. This is a secondary laser or light module, but the laser is obviously a primary for aiming in an extreme situation. And when we use that, you can see that white light is really, really kind of the main focus until I get right on there with the green laser, and I'm not sure that's even showing up very well. There it is. You see a little flash of green that comes across. It's a lot. That white light spot is much more forgiving of any kind of pinpointness, and it was only at that one moment when the green happened to hit my camera on the computer that you saw that laser. So it's going to be much easier to get that disorientation, that distraction with the white light.
So Nick writes in, "Hi Rob. Good to have an opportunity to reach out to you. Even better training not long ago. I was just wondering what your carrying less than non-lethal options are. So currently he carries a Glock, an extra magazine, a K-bar, and pepper spray. He's trained and professionally with all these tools, but when is too much for someone?"
I don't know that there's a real rule on what is too much, right? I mean, that's kind of like the first question we had. How do we conceal a larger gun? Well, how do we carry more tools? How do we conceal more options? That's the way most people approach it. I think the more important question is how much reaction time are you going to have, and what are you going to be able to do in that reaction and response time to access all those different options and tools you have on you. So let me break the question down a little bit. First of all, a lot of people will look to law enforcement for their guide as to what they should be doing or what they should be carrying or what they should have or what they should train in terms of personal defense. Remember that law enforcement has a very different job. Flashy red and blue light, shiny badge, you go towards the bad guys. A lot of times you also have a lot of warning about what's about to happen. Either another police officer has told you, there's been a citizen report, or you're making an observation, and then you decide to go in and act. Well, if you know that there's a rowdy, loud guy at a restaurant and you've been asked to go in and deal with it, you might have to shoot that guy. But chances are you're going to think about a taser or maybe a baton or maybe just your the hand skills first. You would probably rule out in that setting of a restaurant pepper spray as a first option. On the other hand, if you have someone who is laying on the ground with their hands tucked under their body and their legs pulled in, and they're refusing to be cooperative and kind of open up and release their hands so you can cuff them and take them under arrest, that may be a really good time to think about the pepper spray, whereas because it's just one guy laying on the ground and nobody else is going to get contaminated. So you have some time to process all these different options that you've got on that tool belt. In the private sector, if somebody attacks you, you're in the moment, you've got to make some quick responses after having your initial reactions, and probably not a lot of time to process in the worst case scenarios, which tool you're going to use. And obviously that's also true for law enforcement. The difference is law enforcement spends so much time going into confrontations that they know are about to happen. So having more options isn't as much of a cognitive burden because they have more preparation time. All that said, I do think it's a good idea to consider having some other level of force when you have a firearm. Claude Werner is a big advocate of this. He's one of our PDN contributors. He's preached for a long time that if you're going to carry a gun, you should have something else also. Clint Smith has been quoted for years and years and years as saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. And if the gun is all you have, then the only solution that you may think of is, or have as an option realistically, is to use that gun. Whereas someone who's more trained in unarmed defense, someone who has a baton, someone who has a Kubaton, somebody who has pepper spray, somebody who has an electrical device, might be able to use that to stop something that didn't quite escalate to where that person decided to go to their gun. So having the alternative, really good idea. Imagining that you're going to have 20 different options and plenty of time to figure out which one to use, probably not realistic preparation.
So we got a live question in the chat. You once received a lot of pushback for championing the idea of storing a firearm in your children's rooms. I think it's brilliant, and as an instructor, have recommended it since. Do you still stand by that recommendation? Absolutely,
yeah. It is definitely something I not only recommend, but that I personally practice. It is, to me, it's common sense, and I think when people think about it, when they get rid of the emotional, kind of pushback on that idea, and they think about, where am I going to go? If something crazy happens right now, there's 3 kids in the house right now, and they're all upstairs. I'm not going to run into the master bedroom and lock the door behind me and hope they figure it out. But my responsibility as a parent, my inclination as a parent, is to go make sure that they're safe. Once I'm there, if they are safe, it would seem foolish to have to take them all back down through the house to the master bedroom where I store all the guns so that they can then be barricaded with me and I can have my defensive tool. Obviously, it makes a lot more sense to have one staged up there. Again, like we talked about earlier in the show, a quick access safe. However you're going to secure that firearm anywhere in the house. What I've always said is that if your kid is more likely to try to break into the safe because it's in their room versus your room, it's a parenting problem, not a gun problem. Some common sense, again, education of the kids, whether it's in their everyday space, whether they even have to really know that it's there, right? You could maybe hide the quick access safe in a way that they don't even really know it's in their room, behind or in a piece of furniture, maybe in a back corner of the closet. Label it, extra encyclopedias or something. Like put that box with the quick access safe in the back of the corner room. The 13-year-old's not going in to read the encyclopedia books, right? So there's a lot of different options you have as a tactic, as a technique, as a strategy. If you have kids separated from the master bedroom in any way, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think intuitively it makes a lot of sense to parents that they might go there, but there's also this emotional pushback to how that works, and obviously a lot of the mass media pushback was this silly idea that it was take a loaded gun and stick it under your kid's pillow and tell them to be ready in case the bad guy shows up. That's not what we're talking about.
So Kathy wrote in, is a .38 revolver a good self-defense gun for a female? If not, can you recommend one?
No. Let me just say no.
Just no?
Just no. And I'm saying just no because so many people have foolishly said yes that I'm just ready to say no. The fact is, can a .38 revolver be a good personal defense gun for a human being? Sure. Are females human beings? Sure. So therefore, yes, it's possible. It's not probable. It's not the likely solution. It's not the best solution. I used to carry a .38 revolver a lot for a while as a backup gun when I was in law enforcement and as a primary defensive tool when I was in a very low threat environment. I lived in a small town in the mountains of Colorado for a number of years, and that was the gun that was easy to carry. I almost always was near my truck or at a training facility where we had plenty of other guns or larger guns or more capable guns. Rifles, long guns, but the reality was that just walking around town every day, that revolver was probably fine. It's definitely not the best. It wasn't the best choice for me then. It's not the best choice for me now, and it's not what I rely on now. It's not something I recommend for anyone as a primary defensive tool, but particularly someone who has smaller hands, someone who has less hand and upper body strength. those two, and somebody who's a beginner shooter. So all three of those things are quite often characteristics that people would assume, and that most instructors would assume if someone says, is that a good gun for a woman? There's no difference between women and men in terms of what kind of gun they should have. Anybody with smaller hands, less upper body strength, who's a relatively new shooter, yes, that person, male or female, there are certain guns we would recommend, and a .38 revolver would not be one of them.
Gotcha. So what is the #1 training focus for concealed carry that you would recommend? Drawing from the holster, focusing on sight picture, trigger control, something else?
Very similar to the question that was asked earlier, and I went specifically for concealed carry with that presentation from the holster being what's missing from a lot of people's practice and really high-level skill development. Given that there were some various options there, I think that really working on an intuitive and consistent interface with the gun, and then platform for shooting. So in other words, how you hold the gun, making sure you're very consistent and that you have the best possible grip. Obviously, any of these topics that we've talked about so far, people can go to personaldefensenetwork.com, put any of these topics into the search engine, and they're going to find videos and articles covering all of them, I'm sure. I know that shooting grip and shooting stance and shooting position, the extended shooting position, all of these things are going to be covered in great detail, greater than we're going to cover right now. I think those are the most important things, though, the grip and your platform, how you hold the gun, and then how you present the gun in parallel with your line of sight. And that you're doing that intuitively, which always we define as working well with what the body does naturally, and that you're doing it athletically. I think that's probably on a big concept. That's what's missing from a lot of people's shooting, is that they're shooting in a very mechanical, static way. They're not shooting athletically. Shooting and fighting should be athletic endeavors when it comes to defensive shooting, and that's what's missing. So shooting in a more natural way, shooting in a way that ensures consistency in your relationship with the gun, and then sets the gun up for not only proper alignment, but reliability, and then good recoil management. So the athleticism and your interface with the gun.
So how can people train to be more athletic than they currently are? I know we've had the question come up in other PDN lives of how can people get off the couch and get ready for their class with you. I mean, what would you recommend for people to get into better shape to conceal carry?
There's an intimidation factor when I say be more athletic sometimes. I'm glad the follow-up question, whether you threw that in there or that's in there, I think that's a really important follow-up question, because when I say athleticism, I don't mean you have to go, join a CrossFit gym and drop 10 pounds of fat, add 20 pounds of muscle, and become a lot faster. What I mean is, however your body moves naturally, as athletic as you can be, as dynamic as you can be, that's what I mean. Now, obviously, I don't have to look through the other side of that camera to know that there's people out there who know they can be more athletic. They have the potential. But they're going to have to drop some pounds. They're going to have to add some muscle. They're going to have to start to be faster. They're going to have to develop their stamina. And if you're encouraged to do that, then cool. And again, we have fitness information. All kinds of functional fitness programs out there. I'm one of the owners of Endeavor CrossFit out in Columbus, Ohio, or Hilliard, Ohio, just outside of Columbus. People may have seen a lot of the stuff on the Blaze recently on the Active Shooter Response Program that Aaron Giannetti and Rob McKeeman are working out of Columbus. And obviously, we support the CrossFit methodology. We support functional fitness in general. That's something that I've been pushing and preaching for a number of years. We've got the Fit Shot program for people who are shooters that want to start getting into some more athleticism out on the range. Becoming more athletic is a different thing from being athletic on the range. So what I'm talking about in that earlier answer is be as athletic as you can be. If you find yourself wanting in terms of athleticism and capability, then absolutely, get out there and start doing some squats and start doing some lunges and start increasing your range of motion, increasing your flexibility, increasing your strength, increasing your stamina, and then generally become more athletic. And obviously, you're going to become more capable, not just in terms of shooting your gun or defending yourself, but at life. You'll be better at life if you're more athletic.
Be better at life. I like that. Can we touch base back again on the storing firearms in the children's room? We had a follow-up question in the live chat. So someone asks, how do you account for overpenetration when you have to get to your children, but the bad guy's in front of, or your children are behind the bad guy?
Two things, and one of which I know there's a video at personaldefensenetwork.com, or you can search for it. It was part of a show I did called Trigger Time 3 or 4 years ago now. And we talked about backstops, creating backstops inside of your house. And I'm going to go back to the encyclopedias, except instead of a fake encyclopedia box now, this is real encyclopedias, actual paper ones. If you take a bookshelf and you pack it, obviously tightly with books, making sure that there aren't any gaps, and considering angles and things, if there happens to be a 8-inch long, 1-inch kind of tube opening, the chances of a bullet going through that without hitting a book at any angle are slim and none. But the idea is create a space inside of the kids' rooms or just outside of the kids' rooms where the wall that you're worried about, so in other words, if you think about where your most likely path of travel is going to be to get to your kids, where the bad guy would be coming from most likely, where your kids are in that room most likely, or especially if there's a common wall between the master bedroom and the kids' room, now you've got a situation where you definitely want to think about, where would you be and would you be shooting towards that wall? Well, if just on the other side of the wall in the kids' room or on your side of the wall there's a bookshelf packed tightly full of, good hardcover books or softcover books either way, those books should stop any normal personal defense round, whether it be a rifle or a shotgun or a pistol round. Anything that I would recommend certainly is going to be stopped by that bookshelf. So if you're really worried about a certain angle or a certain space, or you can just put up that wall of books inside of the kids' room and tell the kids, this is where you go. If something's happening, the dogs are barking, the glass breaks, the alarm's going off, until I get here, you go hide in this corner. Now you have much less worry because they're behind this wall of books that's going to stop the bullets that are in your gun. And that's really the next piece of the puzzle is, first of all, you shouldn't have bullets inside of your gun, inside of your house, that in any general sense pose some undue danger of passing through multiple walls or going out of your house and into the neighbor's house and all that kind of stuff. If your home defense gun is a 300 Winchester Magnum hunting rifle, you're probably not watching PDN live, but if you are and you've somehow gotten those two things together, stop doing the first one, continue watching PDN live, and stop having a Winchester 300 Magnum as your home defense gun. Get that 223, get that 7.62 by 39, get that 20 gauge shotgun, get the 12 gauge shotgun, get the segmenting slugs from Winchester, or get the buckshot, get something that makes more sense as a defensive round, including that 9mm bonded hollow point bullet, and that's going to be the first thing you're going to do to avoid any injuries to people that aren't actually in that line of fire that you intend.
So kind of touching base on ammunition there, we had someone write in that they're considering purchasing a 9mm defense handgun, but they're not quite sure about 9mm ammunition. Can you kind of give a 9mm 101, like kind of explaining Luger, NATO, plus P for someone who's new?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different versions, right? And it gets so bad that we've had two people, I think, in the history of our classes show up with 9mm Kurtz ammunition, which is actually 380 ammunition, but that's one of the European descriptors of it is 9mm Kurtz, and they showed up with what we know mostly as 380 ACP for a 9mm Parabellum or 9mm NATO type round, a 9x19 millimeter. So again, 9x19, 9mm Parabellum, 9mm NATO, and then you get into the plus P or the plus P plus designations. I'm gonna boil it down because, again, probably outside of the purview of most people who are just, hey, I need a gun to defend myself, I need a gun to carry around, what should I get? The kinds of guns we recommend, the modern striker-fired 9mm guns, they're all going to work just fine with a box of bullets that says 9mm NATO. They're going to work just fine with a box of bullets that says 9mm Parabellum. They're going to work just fine with a box of 9mm plus P. The plus P just means that it has a higher pressure rating than what an organization called SAMI that monitors such things has designated as the standard pressure for 9mm. Inside of the standard pressures of 9mm, 9mm NATO rounds, NATO spec rounds, are generally going to be hotter and closer to that 9mm plus P than your kind of standard 9mm rounds. All of that really is nuance. You want to find a good bonded hollow point, a hollow point with a modern bonded jacket from a major manufacturer. That's where we start. If you get that in a standard pressure or a plus P in a modern striker fired gun, you're going to be in really good shape. There are some specialty ammos out there. The first one that comes to mind, obviously, we're doing a PDN event, and Liberty Ammunition was one of the sponsors of the Personal Defense Network training tour last year. They make a solid bullet that is a hollow point bullet, but it is a different kind of configuration. It's not the heavy jacket that's bonded to a lead core. It's a very lightweight bullet that's moving at a very high speed. And actually, it was about this time last year, maybe a little bit earlier, about 13, 14 months ago, I did a lot of extensive testing with the ammo, both for reliability, because we do worry about lightweight bullets being reliable in some guns, and for performance, what they did inside of gelatin and what they did, especially through intermediate barriers. And I was very impressed with what the bullets did in terms of meeting the claims of the manufacturer, and that was what sort of allowed them to become sponsors for the Personal Defense Network training tour. So there are some specialty ammunitions out there that deviate from what we generally recommend that are definitely viable options. If you like the idea of the lighter, faster, somebody asked about over-penetration earlier, that's one of the things you're going to avoid being as worried about with something like the Liberty ammunition that is definitely a lot lighter and a lot faster than the standard rounds. But any good standard bonded, jacketed hollow point, standard pressure or plus P in a modern striker fired gun, you're going to be in good shape. As most people know that watch, I carry the Winchester, either the W round or the what used to be the PDX-1 Defender, the Defender round. And honestly, I've been leaning toward the W round. It's a reduced recoil round, so it shoots a little bit faster than the standard pressure rounds or the plus P rounds, and of course faster bullets into the bad guy that are doing what you need them to do. That's what we want.
Cool. So for those of you that have just joined us, this is PDN Live, the first one of 2016, and it's a special one. It's Ask Rob Pincus Anything About Personal Defense. We've got a lot of great questions coming in. Keep them coming in the live chat. If you want to connect with us in other places, find us online at personaldefensenetwork.com. Find us on Facebook as well, Instagram, and Twitter. And Rob, as you mentioned earlier, is all over the internet. You should be able to find him just about anywhere. So we'll just keep plugging along these questions. We have a lot to cover in the last half an hour of the show, so we'll just keep going. So Rob, we have a handicapped firearms instructor who would like to know if there's any training on personal defense for handicapped people. And he's trying to put something together but not sure how to go about putting together this personal defense program. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to put together almost like a niche program like this person's trying to do?
Yeah, I think that it's important to remember that the fundamentals don't change, right? And so if someone is they have a mobility issue, or maybe they're missing digits or a hand, or they have no use of one arm, it's hard to, as an instructor who's worked with a lot of people that fit into the handicap or disabled category, it's hard to over-stress. I can't tell you how important it is to stick with the fundamentals, like stick with the core concepts. I always say that, like, the course that I teach, the defensive pistol shooting course, the combat focused shooting course that we teach, it's obviously built around this archetype of a human being with a defensive firearm. So there's this 0 point of, here's a archetype of a human being, certain strength, certain height, certain range of motion, certain body type, and they've got a gun and a holster, and like this is where they are. They're at the 0 point. Well, that course, without changing anything, accommodates it, because nobody's actually that 0 point archetype. You can be 10 degrees or 20 degrees off this way, or you can be 10 degrees or 20 degrees off this way, a little stronger or a little less range of motion, or a little taller or a little shorter, or a little longer fingers or a little shorter fingers, and what we put out is going to accommodate you without any change in the script. You start getting to 90 degrees offline, and we might have to change the script. If you don't have the hand strength, if you don't have the range of motion, if you have extremely long fingers, we might start changing the way we tell you to grip a gun, or change the way we tell you to reload your gun, or change the way we tell you something about presentation from the holster if your body type is particularly angled in a way that you aren't here. You're way off the scale over here. Well, if you go past that 90 degree, that's where I always, okay, now we get into something is definitely different, right? Now we've got a situation where someone's only got one hand to use. They don't have two hands. Well, that's a huge difference. Once we get to 120 or 160 or 180 degrees off the scale one way or another, we start changing things. And that could be that doesn't have to be a negative in a lot of ways. It could be a positive. Maybe somebody's has a shooting habit that they've developed. They've shot for 10 or 15 or 20 years, and they're off the scale in this direction where they do this thing that we would never recommend, but they do it really, really well. And they've kind of got it to the point where it's still not the best that they could have done, but with 20 years of work invested in it, we're going to let them keep doing it, because trying to change it would require so much work that it probably doesn't justify the 1 or 2% better that somebody could actually become using the technique we would teach them if they were a blank slate. So people say, well, I want a women's only course, or I want a course for guys over 60 because their vision's different, or I want a course for wounded vets. Well, that's great as long as it's really more of a, we're going to tweak good fundamentals for you than it is we're going to reinvent the wheel and tell you that because you're a woman you need a different kind of gun and a different kind of holster and a different kind of shooting position and all this other stuff. And it's just not true unless your body requires it. If your mental or physical abilities require something to be different for you, by all means, we as instructors need to accommodate that. So if someone has a passion for wanting to be the person who can accommodate a lot of different deviations from the norm, you got to get really, really good at teaching normal people, like whatever that is to you, that archetype. If you don't have a huge command of the core principles, then trying to reinvent the wheel for someone who deviates from what the core would be doesn't make any sense to me. One guy that we've worked with at PDN is Jacob Romo. Jake Romo with White Rabbit Protective Services out of Memphis, Tennessee. We actually have a DVD for wheelchair-bound defensive shooting that we did with him. And I've worked with some other people in the industry. And the fundamental conversation before I say, yeah, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say at PDN has to be, what are your core fundamental concepts? What would you teach someone who is able-bodied? And if you're really, really good at teaching people who are able-bodied and you do it a lot, you're going to bump into some of those variations. You're going to bump into some of those deviations, and you're going to learn how to accommodate them without violating core principles. So that's, to me, is the biggest warning to somebody that wants to start a niche program, is make sure you're able to teach a common core program really, really well first before you start deciding to get into a niche.
So can we touch base a little bit on people who aren't able-bodied and what they train on, and like think, for example, we had someone write in who had wrist surgery recently and they have trouble racking their slide. Like, what techniques could we give some people? I know we have multiple questions on just different techniques like racking a slide if you're not able-bodied enough to do it, or personal defense tactics from a wheelchair. We've had a couple of those write in, or those with walkers. Do you have any sort of like responses that you could have for those people right now who aren't necessarily watching the DVDs or watching online or able to go to a class close to where they're at?
It's difficult to guess what, again, here's the norm. We accommodate here with just regular information. When someone's over here, I don't know what this is. Like, this could be I'm in a wheelchair, or this could be I only have one hand to use, this could be I don't have the hand strength to rack my slide because of arthritis. Like, I'm not sure what the problem is. So without being on the range or having more specific information, I don't know that I could help whoever specifically was asking the question. I can say generally, one of the things that really a light bulb moment for me with wheelchair-bound shooting is the idea that on a range especially, you can take both hands off the wheelchair and start shooting, and nothing really is going to happen. But most places on the planet Earth out in the public space aren't perfectly level and aren't perfectly even. So one of the things that people who are in wheelchairs have helped me to understand that I never would have understood without having them in class or hearing them talk about it, and Jake Romo is one guy who really accommodates this well in his teaching, is the idea that if you put both hands on the gun, your chair is going to start moving. And now you've got a moving platform to shoot from, and that doesn't make any sense. So emphasizing a lot of one-handed shooting so that you can stabilize your chair, or potentially modifying your chair so that you have like some quick throw levers for brakes that you can put on with either hand, so that you can lock a wheel down so that your wheelchair is stabilized, and you build that into your process of presentation, whether you're presenting from your body or from a bag on the chair. This idea of locking the chair down becomes so important, and it's something that would never be covered in the core of a defensive shooting class. This idea that you have to, you're not running around on roller skates and you have to figure out how to keep your feet still. So things like that are general. Racking the slide, we get a lot of people that say, well, I can't rack the slide on my gun. And obviously this gun's clear. I put these out here just in case I had to demo something. And someone will say, well, I can't rack the slide. Okay, well show me you racking the slide. Usually the slide will be forward. And what they'll do is, and I'll try to get the important part on the screen here, is I'll see this. Well, I can barely rack a slide like this. Like my elbows have to bend for me to be able to get the range of motion that's required for that slide to move the 2, 3, 4 inches that it needs to move. I need to be doing some kind of a push and pull. So if I'm trying to slingshot this thing out at extension or down at my waist, yeah, I'm probably going to have a hard time racking the slide too. And same thing if I'm doing it out here, or if I'm trying to do it up here in my eye line. Like, that's not easy to do for really anybody. So if 9 times out of 10, when people tell me they can't rack the slide, it's technique. If you have 2 hands and you have normal range of motion throughout your elbows and your wrists and your shoulders, then pushing and pulling, having the gun in really close, having the gun in here in that ready position, grabbing the top of the slide, and then pulling back and pushing at the same time, combining all those things together is really how you solve that problem. If you can't do that, if you don't have the range of motion, now I don't know where you're missing the range of motion. If you're down to 1 hand, well, then you get something like a good front face of a rear sight that's in the claw sight, like this one. It's concave. It's designed to be racked on the belt. So it's designed to actually be racked on the belt, on the holster, on the edge of a table. We can come in here like this and hit that. That could be a steering wheel. So the methods for racking a slide, there's a core technique that will help 90% of the humans on the planet. If you don't have the range of motion or the hand strength, then it might be a gear issue. It might go all the way to the point where there are people that I've had in classes that, because of arthritis or upper body strength issues, they're not going to be able to rack the slide on a 9mm. Counterintuitively, bigger guns are often easier to rack than smaller guns. So we might say, well, the subcompact gun that may be easier for you to carry but that you can't actually operate isn't viable. So you're going to need a larger gun so you can get more surface area on the slide, more surface area on the grip to push and pull. We might recommend a tip-up barrel gun in a very extreme situation. I've been known to recommend that Beretta, that mid-size Beretta that I think is a Model 85. It's not, don't quote me on that one for sure, don't hold me to that, but it's the tip-up barrel, relatively large 380 gun, because the tip-up barrel allows you to never really have to worry about racking slide for the normal functioning of the gun. And the 380, because of the recoil issues, in a large gun, that gun doesn't give much recoil, so someone with very weak hands, very little upper body strength might be well served by that gun. But by no means would I suggest to the average person that that's a good choice for personal defense. So accommodating those deviations is incredibly personalized, and it's very hard to generalize about them. Get to a class. Like, if you get to a class, if someone's a PDN contributor, someone's one of my certified combat focused shooting instructors, you get yourself to a class, they'll be able to accommodate you. They'll be able to help you figure it out. And it might just be that. It might be getting out on the range and figuring it out, because your situation is your situation.
How does one become certified through your program as an instructor?
There's a lot of different ways. So under IC Training Company, we've got several different instructor development programs, all the way from, I've never taught anybody before. That's our defensive firearms coach program. Really a good idea to have some shooting background, have some firearms knowledge before you come to that class, but it doesn't require any teaching. It doesn't really require any advanced anything. That's a class for people that want to help people get their concealed carry permits, get started in defensive shooting, become fundamentally ready to defend themselves with a gun. That course covers both an introduction to defensive shooting in the context of home defense and an introduction to defensive shooting in the context of concealed carry. So 2 different courses they can get certified to teach through that program. That program is actually headed up by a guy named Jamie Onion. He's a full-time police officer, but also an instructor in our programs and other programs out of Ohio. We've got the combat focus shooting program. That program requires that you have taken a combat focus shooting course as a prerequisite. Once you've done that and you decide you want to be invested in teaching that program, most of the people who go to that next level to take the 5-day combat focus shooting instructor course are either already defensive firearms coaches in our program, or they have some other teaching experience, maybe an NRA instructor certification, something like that. There's a couple other specialty programs, Fit Shot Coaching, our reality-based training instructor course. All the information on that can be found at icetraining.us, or someone can send me a direct message and see what we've got coming up. I've got one course coming up in Louisiana near New Orleans in February for a 5-day instructor development course, and I believe we're doing one in Colorado, one in Florida, and one somewhere else that I'm forgetting. We're in Washington State up in July. Actually, one of the last courses in the Personal Defense Network training tour this year. So we've got that one coming up too.
Awesome. Well, let's do a little bit of scenario here. If someone is attempting to rob you at gunpoint and tells you to empty your pockets, what's the best course of action if you have a loaded pistol in your pocket?
Ooh, that's tough. Generally speaking, if what I'll do is I talk about mugging money or distraction money. If I'm walking around, any place where, even downtown Denver, but certainly, if I'm in a city that I don't know very well, if I'm in a part of town that maybe, I'm expecting things to be not exactly safe, as safe as they are walking around, a small town in the middle of, Georgia somewhere. If I'm in any kind of a big city environment like that, where I'm on foot and I'm, especially if I'm not carrying a gun, I'll talk about mugging money or throw money or distraction money, wherever my wallet and whatever cash I have is kept, somewhere other than that. I'm usually on the left side of my body so I can keep my strong hand free for other things that might need to be done. I'll have $20 in ones and fives, maybe a couple tens, something like that thrown into that pocket so that I can reach into a pocket and go to hand that to somebody or drop it on the ground or throw it on the ground specifically to act as first of all, if somebody just wants some cash, hey, here's my cash, is all I got. It's credit card society, this is what I've got, take my cash if you want it. And maybe I'm just out of it for $20, right? Easier to get out of that situation in a lot of cases than pull a gun and have the rest of your life change. The other thing you can do, obviously, is take that, throw that down on the ground, drop it on the ground. Now when the person goes to pick that up, or even if they just look at it and they're kind of like trying to figure out what to do next, that could give you that window of opportunity to escape or to take other action. So, if you're fishing through your pockets looking for your money or looking for your wallet, and you pull out the throw money, and their reaction to that throw money gives you the opportunity to pull your gun out to the ready position, to pull your gun out and go straight to a shooting position if you need to shoot, or maybe just drop that money, keep your hand on your gun, and hope that they pick the money up and go, and you don't have to pull your gun. Those can all be options. Let me just take that a little bit further. If the next question is, what do you do if you're carrying a gun, you are being confronted, somebody has you at gunpoint, and your gun is going to be discovered. Someone's going to find out you have a gun, and you're afraid that that's going to escalate the situation, or you're going to lose your opportunity to use that gun to defend yourself or others. It's kind of like one of those things where you'll be told quite often, if somebody says get in the car, don't ever get in the car. If somebody says go into the back room, don't go into the back room. Well, it's easy to say that, except, okay, I'm not going to get in the car. What am I going to do? Get shot here on the street? And the idea is secondary crime scene, right? If you know that your gun being introduced into a situation is possibly going to make it worse for you, that's a decision-making point. That's a point where you want to have a script in your mind where the minute that you realize you're not getting out of this without your gun being discovered, I would say this: it's better that that gun is in your hand than in their hands when it gets discovered, and that's where your physical skills, your distraction skills, your verbal skills, how you carry your gun and where you carry your gun and how accessible it is, maybe left hand and or right hand, center line carry, all of those things become incredibly important in that moment. And it's important to think about that. It may not be this textbook scenario where you see the bad guy coming and you can clear your concealment garment and draw, present, and shoot. You may be in a situation like this where they've got the drop on you and you still are going to need to get that gun in your hand, or surrender it and roll the dice.
So that's actually, it's interesting that you did that follow-up because that was my next question, but let's kind of alter it a little bit. So yeah, a variety of potentially confrontational situations exist. So can you give some examples of when and when not to present a firearm? That might be helpful.
Um, you know, we've seen some things in the news recently where people have shot at shoplifters, right? Like there was a thing, there was a one at a, I think it was Home Depot, but one of the big box hardware stores where someone shot at fleeing shoplifters, which was ridiculous. As a female shooter. Just recently here outside of Denver, we had a guy shoot warning shots in the air at a guy who was running from a robbery at a Subway. You know, a guy was there to buy a sandwich, and he ended up chasing a bad guy out of the store and then firing shots recklessly in the air, and he's being charged. That those would have been really good times not to draw a gun. So drawing a gun to defend property is probably a really bad idea. Drawing a gun to defend someone else's property is probably a worse idea, and drawing a gun to stop bad guys who are getting away with some retail chain's property is just probably as bad as it gets in terms of reckless use of a firearm. Like, not your job, don't do it, don't draw the gun. I talked a moment ago about that idea that if the gun's going to be found, you probably want it in your hand and not theirs. That's a time to draw a gun. One of the interesting things we talk a lot about in classes nowadays when people talk about terrorism and spree killing and active shooters and all this kind of stuff, people ask, well, if the shooting's going on in the mall over there somewhere and I know there's a bad guy, should I draw my gun or not? And I'm usually going to say yes, especially if you're in our 2-day CFS class. You know, if you've never taken any serious training and you aren't used to moving around with your gun and you don't know what the high compressed ready position is, then this piece of advice really isn't for you. But if someone's, you know, taking a 2-day class with us, by the time you get to the end of that 2-day class, yeah, absolutely. I want you to draw that gun. I want you to take it up to your high compressed ready position. You know, I don't want you flagging it around. I don't want you to be the guy in the mall doing this when the cops come around the corner. You know, but having that gun in close, one hand on it, maybe in one hand shielding, and looking and, you know, being prepared to defend yourself, getting your family behind you, finding a good corner, finding a strong position of advantage, looking for an exit, moving around those corners with that gun in your hand like this isn't likely to get you shot. You might get a gun pointed at you. You might be told to drop the gun, and you should. You know, but it's not this. It's not running around like Jack Bauer through the mall or something. Like, that's a bad idea. So drawing a gun in preparation and holding it in an appropriate way so that you're prepared to use it when there's an imminent threat in your environment is very different from drawing a gun and going and looking for trouble or getting yourself into trouble. Outside of that, I mean, it's you know, when somebody's trying to kill you, I think it's pretty obvious. When not to draw the gun is probably the more important thing to talk about. And then there is that gray area where you're not in immediate danger, but it would still be prudent to draw the gun. And those things are honestly pretty rare in the private defense, personal defense, private sector world.
So I think we have time for one more question before we wrap it up tonight. We've had a lot of really good live questions come in addition to the questions that were sent in to social@personaldefensenetwork.com. So we have someone writing in saying that they shoot right-handed but are left-eye dominant. What's the best way to remedy this problem so they can shoot more accurately?
If I'd have won the Powerball thing this week, which I think I would have had to have bought a ticket, but let's say that someone won that likes me and was going to give me a whole bunch of money and drive really fast to go back in time and stop anyone from ever thinking that eye dominance matters in terms of defensive shooting, because it doesn't. And I don't care whose book, what program, what guru from 1985, 75, 65, 2015 is telling you that it matters, it doesn't. And the tests to prove eye dominance prove that it doesn't matter. You know, whatever one you want to use, the one where you stick your thumb out and see which eye it ends up in front of, the one where you do the little hole and you pull it back and see where the little hole ends up in front of your left eye or right eye. That test, there's no difference between me sticking my thumb out in front of my face and me sticking this gun out in front of my face. The brain puts the thumb in front of the eye that it prefers under those circumstances. The gun's going to end up in front of the eye that the brain prefers under those circumstances. So at that moment, you're going to end up, you know, that moment that you need the gun, you're going to end up with the gun in the right place. Standing on a range, overthinking it, is what gets people into trouble. And this idea that's been around for far too long, that if someone's left eye dominant but right-handed, the day they show up at the range, you're supposed to try to teach them to be coordinated and dexterous with their left hand, with their weak hand, because their eye is different, instead of just knowing that their head is going to turn slightly to get the gun in front of the appropriate eye. It's just silly. With a shotgun, it matters. With a rifle, it matters probably a little less. With a shotgun, with a bead sight, shooting at birds, shooting at clay pigeons, it matters, and that's where that piece of information comes from. So eye dominance doesn't matter. Again, it's just going to show up. You know, and the tests prove it, and I think that's important to understand. The tests prove that this gun is going to end up where your thumb does and where the hole does, and that's the key. If someone doesn't understand that, they probably don't understand vision well enough to be talking about it, and they probably shouldn't be talking about how vision interacts with defensive shooting skills if that doesn't make sense to them.
Gotcha. So we're at the top of the hour. And Rob, I know you've got a lot of videos lined up for PDN Live in the next couple months, but we have so many questions that came through tonight. Is there a possibility that we can do a part 2 of Ask Rob Pincus anything about personal and self-defense?
Yeah, I enjoy it. If we've got that many questions, I think I'm in for February. I know we have a lot of PDN contributors that are anxious. We have some people from this 2015 lineup that are going to come back in 2016, because I know we had some extra questions when they were on, and we've got some new people to add as well. I'll be going to SHOT Show, the industry trade show, next week. I'm having some meetings with some new contributors that are also potentially going to be instructors on the PDN tour. So we do have a full boat of guys that we want to get on the show. But yeah, I'm sure we will find time next month or March, the worst case scenario, for another self-defense free-for-all. As I enjoyed it. I like the randomness of the questions too. So I like answering them on the fly, and it's definitely what we got tonight. So again, I appreciate the questions coming in, and anybody who wants to learn more about anything that we talked about tonight, personaldefensenetwork.com probably has a video or an article or 20 about it, about that topic. And anything we didn't get to tonight, again, Shannon said we'll try to get to it in the near future. Or you can go to Personal Defense Network, look for one of the videos or articles on your topic, and if you don't find your question answered, hit the comments. Ask a follow-up question in the comments, and we'll be sure to get to it.
Awesome. Are you going to hang around afterwards for a little bit to monitor the questions on this live session?
Yeah. As usual, what we'll do is anybody who has a follow-up question about anything that was talked about tonight, we will answer it. I'll jump in there. I'll keep a really close eye on it for the next hour or two, and then over the next day or two, I'll keep popping back in there at the YouTube channel and answering those questions in the comments.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun tonight, and thank you, everybody, for the live questions as well as writing in ahead of time. And it sounds like we'll be doing this again. So have a great January, and we'll see you all in February.